Welcome to Buddha's Healing, a quiet space where we gently reflect on the wisdom of the Buddha and learn how to care for the heart, soften emotional suffering, and rediscover peace in every season of life. Dear friends, loneliness is one of the quietest forms of suffering. It rarely announces itself loudly. It often arrives slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. And for many people after 70, loneliness becomes something difficult to explain. Because from the outside, life may still look fine, the bills are paid, the house still stands, family exists. Daily routines continue, perhaps even smiles still appear, yet somewhere deep inside, the heart feels tired. Quiet, heavy, disconnected, and perhaps the most painful part, many people do not know how to talk about it. Because loneliness after 70 often hides itself behind politeness, behind routines, behind strength, behind phrases like, "I am doing okay," "I am fine, just keeping busy." But dear friends, sometimes fine quietly means, "I miss connection, I feel forgotten, life feels quieter than I expected. I don't know who really sees me anymore." Please hear this gently if you have ever felt this way. You are not weak, you are not failing, and no, there is nothing wrong with you. Loneliness is deeply human, especially after 70, because life changes. Children grow older, friendships shift, retirement changes daily rhythms, loved ones pass away, communities become smaller. Conversations become fewer, and little by little, life grows quieter, sometimes much quieter than the heart expected. The Buddha taught that suffering often grows when we feel disconnected, disconnected from ourselves, disconnected from others, disconnected from meaning, and loneliness often touches all three. Some people experience loneliness after losing a spouse, others after retirement, some after children move away, some while surrounded by people who no longer seem to truly understand them. And perhaps one of the hardest truths about loneliness is this: you can feel lonely even in a crowded room, even inside a marriage, even inside a family. Because loneliness is not always about the absence of people. Sometimes it is the absence of emotional closeness. The absence of feeling understood, seen, heard, needed. Dear friends, have you ever noticed this? Some people after 70 seem peaceful even when living alone, while others feel lonely even surrounded by family. Why? Because solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Solitude can nourish the soul. Loneliness quietly drains it. Solitude feels chosen. Loneliness feels unwanted. Solitude restores, loneliness exhausts, and over time, loneliness can quietly affect more than emotions. Sleep changes, energy lowers, joy becomes harder to access. The body feels heavier, the mind becomes more anxious, even motivation fades, and many people quietly wonder, why do I feel so tired? Why do I feel emotionally heavy? Why does life feel emptier than before? Perhaps the heart is simply lonely, and perhaps no one ever taught us how to care for loneliness with compassion. Instead, many people learned how to hide it, stay busy, stay strong, avoid talking about it, pretend it does not hurt. But dear friends, pain hidden too long often becomes heavier, and loneliness carried silently can quietly exhaust even the strongest heart. Today, we are going to gently reflect on why so many people over 70 feel lonely, and how the wisdom of the Buddha may help soften emotional suffering and heal a tired heart. Not through blame, not through shame, not by pretending loneliness disappears overnight, but through compassion, awareness, connection, and gentle healing. Together, we will explore why loneliness often grows after 70, the emotional wounds many people never speak about, how loneliness quietly affects health, sleep, and emotional peace. The difference between solitude and emotional isolation, and perhaps most importantly, how to slowly reconnect with meaning, warmth, and inner peace again. Because, dear friends, even after loss, even after disappointment, even after loneliness, healing is still possible, connection is still possible, peace is still possible, and perhaps the tired heart is not broken. Perhaps it is simply longing to be held with more compassion. So before we continue, take one slow breath. Let your shoulders soften and gently ask yourself, in what ways has my heart been quietly lonely? Because sometimes, the first step toward healing is simply telling the truth about what hurts, dear friends. Let us gently begin with an honest question. Why does loneliness seem to grow stronger after 70? Not for everyone, of course, but for many people, something changes. Life becomes quieter, the world becomes smaller. And somehow, the heart begins missing things it never expected to miss: conversations, shared routines, laughter, feeling needed, feeling understood, feeling emotionally close to someone. And often, this loneliness arrives so quietly that people hardly notice it at first. A missed phone call, a quieter dinner table, fewer invitations, more evenings spent alone, more silence, until one day, the quiet begins feeling heavy. Please hear this gently. Loneliness after 70 is not imaginary. It is real, deeply real, and often deeply painful. Many people quietly blame themselves. Why do I feel this way? I should be grateful. I shouldn't feel lonely. Other people have it worse. But dear friends, pain does not disappear because someone else suffers too. Loneliness deserves compassion, not judgment, because after 70, life naturally changes in ways the heart often struggles to prepare for. Children grow up. Retirement changes purpose and routine. Friends move away. Loved ones pass, health shifts. Communities become smaller, and slowly, many people begin grieving things they never realized they were losing. Not only people, but seasons of life. Old identities, familiar routines, the feeling of being needed every day, and perhaps one of the quietest losses of all, feeling emotionally understood. Today, we gently reflect on something many people rarely say out loud. Loneliness after 70 is often grief in disguise. The Buddha gently reminded people that attachment brings suffering. And this teaching can sound painful at first, because naturally, we become attached to people, to routines, to relationships, to seasons of life, to roles that once gave us meaning: a parent, a spouse, a worker, a caregiver, a provider. And when life changes, the heart often feels lost, not because anything is wrong, but because change hurts, impermanence hurts, even natural change hurts, dear friends. Sometimes loneliness is not only about missing people. Sometimes loneliness is missing who we used to be. The busy parent, the spouse caring for someone every day, the person everyone depended on, the worker with purpose, the one constantly needed. And when those roles change, silence can suddenly feel frightening, because identity quietly shifts too. The Buddha taught that suffering softens when we stop resisting change and begin meeting it with awareness. Not forcing ourselves to move on, not pretending grief disappears, but learning how to sit beside change gently. With kindness, with patience, with compassion. Imagine spending decades hearing footsteps in the house, conversations in the kitchen, laughter, schedules, noise, activity. Then one day, silence. The house has not changed. Yet somehow, everything feels different. Dear friends, loneliness after 70 is often not simply loneliness. It is accumulated change, accumulated endings, Accumulated quiet, accumulated grief. And because society often tells older adults to simply stay positive, many people stop speaking honestly about how hard it feels. They say, I am okay, I am adjusting, I am staying busy, but deep inside the heart whispers, I miss feeling close. I miss being understood. I miss connection. Please hear this gently. There is no shame in this. The longing for connection is deeply human. The longing to feel seen never truly disappears, no matter age, and perhaps the first step toward healing loneliness is not pretending we are fine. Perhaps healing begins with honesty. Quiet honesty, the courage to whisper, I feel lonely, because dear friends, what is named gently can begin healing gently. Perhaps tonight, you might ask yourself, what kind of connection does my heart quietly miss? What season of life am I still grieving? Have I mistaken silence for strength? Sometimes, the healing of loneliness begins not with solving it, but with finally understanding it. There was a woman named Carolyn. She was 77 years old, living alone in a quiet neighborhood outside Seattle. From the outside, most people thought Carolyn was doing fine. She still smiled at neighbors, went to the grocery store every Thursday, attended church occasionally, kept flowers growing near the front porch, and whenever someone asked how she was doing, she always smiled and said, "Oh, I am doing all right." But the truth, Carolyn had been lonely for a very long time, ever since her husband, James, passed away 4 years earlier. 40 years together, 40 years of shared routines, morning coffee, inside jokes, dinner conversations, Sunday drives, small ordinary moments that once felt invisible, until suddenly they disappeared. At first, people showed up, neighbors brought food, friends called, family visited. Her daughter Rebecca checked in constantly. Everyone said, if you need anything, let us know, and Carolyn appreciated it. She really did, but something happened slowly. Life moved on. For everyone else, the phone rang less. The visits became shorter. The house became quieter, much quieter. At first, Carolyn tried staying busy. She watched television, cleaned closets, reorganized shelves, took long drives with nowhere particular to go. But loneliness has a strange way of waiting, quietly, patiently. It appears at dinner time, in empty rooms, on birthdays, during holidays, in the silence before sleep. And perhaps the hardest moments of all were the ordinary ones, the moments she instinctively turned to speak to James, before remembering he was no longer there. Those moments hurt the most. One afternoon while grocery shopping, Carolyn overheard two women laughing near the coffee aisle. Something about their easy conversation suddenly hit her. Unexpectedly, her chest tightened, tears rose quickly, and for a moment, she realized something she had been avoiding. She wasn't only grieving James. She was grieving companionship, being known, being understood without explanation. Being asked, "How was your day?" that evening. Rebecca came over with dinner. While washing dishes, she looked at her mother carefully. Mom, Carolyn smiled. Yes. Rebecca hesitated. Are you lonely? The question lingered, heavy, uncomfortable. Carolyn almost gave her usual answer. I am fine. But something inside felt too tired to pretend. After a long silence, she quietly whispered, sometimes, then softly added, more than I want to admit. Rebecca gently reached for her hand. Oh, Mom, and for the first time in years, Carolyn cried, not dramatic tears, just quiet ones, tired tears. Lonely tears, the kind that had waited too long. Weeks later, Rebecca gently encouraged Carolyn to join a local community group for older adults. At first, Carolyn refused. "That is for old people," she laughed awkwardly. Rebecca smiled. "You are old people, for the first time in weeks." Carolyn laughed, really laughed, eventually, mostly to stop her daughter from asking. She agreed. The first meeting felt awkward. Small talk, coffee, name tags. She nearly left early. But then, a woman around her age sat beside her and smiled warmly. First time, Carolyn nodded. The woman smiled softly. Mine too. Something small shifted, nothing dramatic. Just warmth, a beginning, week after week. Carolyn kept showing up. Slowly, conversations became familiar. Lunches followed meetings. Phone calls happened. Stories were shared. Grief was shared. Laughter returned. And perhaps most importantly, she no longer felt invisible. One afternoon during a mindfulness discussion, the teacher softly said, "Loneliness softens when the heart remembers it still belongs somewhere." The sentence stayed with Carolyn, because for the first time in years, she realized something beautiful. She still belonged. Life had changed. But connection had not disappeared forever. Months later, Rebecca visited again. "You seem different lately." She smiled. Carolyn laughed softly. "How, you seem lighter." Carolyn paused, then quietly said, "I think I forgot people still need people." Then she smiled. "And maybe I forgot that I still matter too." Dear friends, perhaps there is a Carolyn somewhere inside many of us. Someone quietly carrying loneliness without words. Someone smiling politely, while quietly hurting. Please hear this gently. Loneliness is not weakness. Missing connection is not weakness. Longing to feel seen is not weakness. It is deeply human, especially after 70, especially after change, especially after loss, and perhaps the strongest thing you can do is not hide loneliness. Perhaps strength begins with honesty, the courage to say, "I miss connection. I feel lonely. I need people too," because healing often begins there, not in pretending. Not in isolation, but in connection. One conversation, one returned call, one shared meal, one community. One open heart. Perhaps tonight, you may gently ask yourself, where has my heart quietly stopped reaching out? Who could I let in a little? Because, dear friends, even after loss, even after silence, even after loneliness, connection still heals. Dear friends, let us gently move into something many people quietly misunderstand. Something deeply important, and that is the difference between solitude and loneliness. At first, these two things can feel very similar. Both involve quiet, both involve being alone, both involve space. And yet, emotionally, they are completely different. Loneliness feels painful, heavy, unwanted. Loneliness whispers, "No one sees me. No one understands me. I feel forgotten." But solitude feels different, softer. Solitude can become peaceful, healing, sacred. Solitude whispers, "I am still here. I can still care for myself." This quiet can hold me too. Dear friends, many people over 70 quietly fear being alone, especially after retirement, after loss, after divorce, after children move away, and understandably so, because sudden quiet can feel overwhelming. The house changes, the routines disappear, the conversations become fewer, the evenings stretch longer, and silence begins feeling unfamiliar, even frightening. Please hear this gently. There is nothing wrong with feeling this way. The heart naturally grieves change. The heart naturally misses connection. The Buddha understood this deeply. He understood how attached we become to familiar rhythms, to people, to routines, to emotional closeness. And when those things change, suffering naturally appears. But the Buddha also taught something quietly beautiful. Suffering softens when we stop resisting reality and begin befriending the moment we are in, not forcing joy, not pretending loneliness disappears, but slowly learning, perhaps I can be gentle with this season of life too. Because, dear friends, loneliness becomes especially painful when we fight the reality of change, when we tell ourselves, this shouldn't be happening, I shouldn't feel this way, my life shouldn't look like this. But perhaps peace begins when we stop arguing with reality and begin softly asking, how can I care for my heart inside this new season? The Buddha often spent time in stillness, quiet reflection, gentle awareness, not because he rejected people, but because stillness can teach the heart something important: presence. The truth is, silence itself is not the enemy. Unhealed emotional pain inside silence often becomes the real struggle. Some people sit alone and feel peace. Others sit alone and feel abandoned. Why? Because silence often amplifies whatever the heart is carrying. Fear grows louder, grief grows louder, regret grows louder, loneliness grows louder, and sometimes, for the first time in years, people finally hear emotions they spent decades avoiding. Dear friends, perhaps this is why later life feels emotionally different. Life slows down enough for hidden feelings to finally speak. Not to punish us, but perhaps to invite healing. The truth is, solitude becomes healing when we stop treating quiet like punishment. When we stop fearing our own company, when we slowly begin reconnecting with ourselves through reflection, prayer, mindfulness, nature, gentle routines, compassion, even simple things, a morning cup of tea, music, journaling, walking slowly, watching sunlight move through the room, breathing deeply, small moments of emotional kindness. Because, dear friends, a tired heart does not only need people, sometimes it also needs peace with itself. Imagine sitting beside an old friend. No pressure, no expectations, just kindness, patience, softness. Now imagine learning how to become that kind of presence for yourself, especially after 70, especially after loss, especially during quiet seasons. Many people spent decades caring for others, children, partners, parents, work, responsibilities, but very few people learned how to emotionally sit beside themselves kindly. How to say, this hurts, this season feels different, and still I will be gentle with myself. Dear friends, loneliness often says, you are alone, but healing softly whispers, you are still here, you still matter. Life is still unfolding. Perhaps tonight, you may gently ask yourself, have I been afraid of quiet or afraid of what quiet might reveal? How can I make peace with this season of life? Sometimes, healing loneliness begins not by escaping silence, but by slowly learning how to sit inside it with compassion. There was a man named Walter. He was 71 years old, living in a small house outside Portland. 3 years earlier, Walter had retired after working nearly 40 years as a high school teacher. At first, retirement sounded wonderful. More freedom, less stress, quiet mornings, no deadlines, no alarm clock. People told him, you're going to love it, and in the beginning, he thought so too. For a while, he slept in, watched television, fixed things around the house, went fishing occasionally, spent afternoons drinking coffee at local diners. But slowly, something unexpected began happening. The days grew quieter, too quiet. The routines disappeared. Conversations became fewer. His wife, Margaret, still worked part-time at a bookstore. His children lived in different states. Friends were busy with their own lives, and somehow, the silence grew louder. At first, Walter told himself he was fine. This is retirement. I earned this. I should enjoy the peace, but secretly, the quiet felt uncomfortable. Heavy, sometimes lonely. He began filling every moment with noise. Television always on, radio in the background, endless scrolling on his phone, anything to avoid sitting too long in silence, because silence made him uncomfortable. Silence made him think about aging, about purpose, about time passing, about friends he no longer saw, about the version of himself he no longer recognized. One rainy afternoon, Margaret came home from work and noticed him sitting in the dark living room. The television was on, but Walter wasn't watching it. He just stared quietly. "You okay?" she asked gently. Walter shrugged. "Yeah," after a pause he added quietly. "I don't know." That surprised even him, because honestly, he hadn't admitted that to himself. Margaret sat beside him. "What's going on?" Walter sighed deeply, then softly said something he had avoided saying for months. "I think I am lonely." The words sat quietly in the room, heavy, honest, unexpected. Margaret reached for his hand. "Oh," Walter weeks later. At Margaret's encouragement, Walter joined a local mindfulness and walking group for retirees. At first, he hated it. Too quiet, too slow, too awkward. The first walk felt uncomfortable, no distractions. Just silence, birds, wind, breathing, and his own thoughts. Thoughts he had spent months trying to outrun. But something slowly shifted, week after week. The silence stopped feeling threatening. One morning during a group meditation, the teacher softly said, "Sometimes loneliness is not asking for noise. Sometimes loneliness is asking for connection, including connection with yourself." Walter sat very still. Then the teacher continued, "Quiet becomes painful when we only meet it with fear, but quiet becomes healing when we meet it with kindness." Those words stayed with him because for the first time, Walter realized something important. He had spent years fearing stillness. Not because stillness was bad, but because stillness revealed emotions he had avoided: fear, loneliness, loss, the uncertainty of aging, and perhaps something deeper too, the fear that maybe life no longer had meaning. Slowly, Walter began changing small things. He started walking every morning without headphones, not to escape silence, but to meet it. He journaled, sat quietly with coffee before sunrise, called old friends, volunteered at a local literacy center. Little by little, the loneliness softened, not disappeared, but softened, and strangely, the quiet changed too. What once felt empty, now sometimes felt peaceful, even meaningful. Months later, Margaret smiled one morning and said, "You seem different lately." Walter laughed softly. "How? You don't seem afraid of quiet anymore." Walter looked out the window for a moment, then smiled gently. "I think I've finally stopped running from myself, and somehow, that changed everything." Dear friends, perhaps there is a Walter somewhere inside many of us, someone afraid of silence, someone quietly grieving change, someone unsure how to make peace with a quieter season of life. Please hear this gently. Quiet is not the enemy. Loneliness is not failure. Stillness is not punishment. Sometimes, stillness becomes the place healing begins. Not because silence fixes everything, but because silence helps the heart finally speak. And perhaps after 70, one of life's quiet invitations is this: to stop running, to slow down, to reconnect with meaning, with others, and gently with yourself. Because, dear friends, you still matter. Your life still matters. Your heart still deserves peace. Even now, perhaps tonight, you may gently ask yourself, what have I been running from in silence? Could quiet become something softer? How might I care for my own heart a little more gently? Because sometimes, healing begins the moment we stop fearing our own company. If today's reflection touched your heart, please subscribe to Buddha's Healing and continue walking this journey of healing and mindfulness with us. And if quiet has sometimes felt heavy in your life, perhaps leave a gentle comment below. Sometimes healing begins when we realize silence does not have to be lonely after all. Dear friends, let us gently move into something many people quietly experience after 70, yet rarely speak about openly. And that is feeling lonely even while surrounded by people. At first, this may sound confusing. How can someone feel lonely with family around, with a spouse nearby, with children, grandchildren, friends, church groups, neighbors, and yet, dear friends, this kind of loneliness is far more common than many people realize. Because loneliness is not always the absence of people. Sometimes, it is the absence of emotional closeness. The absence of feeling understood, seen, heard, emotionally safe. Many people after 70 quietly carry this ache. Sitting at family dinners, yet somehow feeling invisible, talking with loved ones, yet never speaking honestly about what hurts. Smiling politely, while quietly wondering, would anyone really understand if I told the truth? Please hear this gently. This pain is real, and often deeply hidden, because many older adults learned something early in life. Stay strong. Do not burden others. Do not complain. Keep it together, and over time, that habit becomes emotional silence. A lifetime of swallowing sadness, hiding loneliness, protecting everyone else from your inner world. Until eventually, people stop knowing how you really feel, not because they do not care, but because they stop seeing the hidden pain. And perhaps you stopped showing it. Dear friends, how exhausting that becomes to quietly ache while pretending everything is okay. To crave emotional closeness, yet feel unsure how to ask for it, to miss being deeply understood. And perhaps one of the saddest truths about aging is this: sometimes people stop asking deeper questions. How are you really? What's weighing on your heart? Are you okay? And slowly, the heart begins carrying more in silence. Today, we gently reflect on this question. What happens when loneliness becomes invisible? The Buddha often spoke of compassion. Not only compassion for others, but compassion toward ourselves. And one quiet form of suffering many people ignore is emotional loneliness, the kind no one else sees, the kind hidden behind routines, responsibilities, politeness, strength. Some people after 70 become experts at appearing okay. They host dinners, smile in photographs, say all the right things, yet inside, something quietly aches, not because life is terrible, but because emotional closeness feels distant. Perhaps conversations stay surface level. Perhaps family feels busy. Perhaps grief remains unspoken. Perhaps fears about aging stay hidden. And slowly, the heart begins whispering, does anyone really know me anymore? Dear friends, please hear this gently. The longing to be emotionally seen never disappears with age. The longing for warmth, for meaningful conversation, for understanding, for tenderness, these are deeply human needs. Not weaknesses, needs. And perhaps the first step toward healing emotional loneliness is honesty. Gentle honesty, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but small moments of truth, saying, I've been feeling lonely lately. I miss talking more deeply. I could use some company, because often, people care more than we assume. They simply do not know what is hidden. Imagine standing in a crowded room wearing invisible pain. Everyone sees the smile, the polite words, the routines, but no one sees the ache underneath, not because people are cruel, but because pain hidden too long becomes difficult to notice. Dear friends, perhaps emotional loneliness becomes especially painful after 70 because life naturally becomes more reflective. The pace slows, the distractions lessen, and suddenly, the heart notices what has quietly been missing. Real closeness, real conversation, real emotional warmth. Please hear this gently. You are not asking for too much. Wanting deeper connection is not weakness. Wanting to feel emotionally close is not weakness. Wanting someone to truly listen is not weakness. Perhaps tonight, you might gently ask yourself, who truly knows what my heart has been carrying? Have I hidden my loneliness too well? What small truth could I begin sharing? Sometimes, healing loneliness begins not with grand changes. Sometimes, it begins with one honest conversation, one open heart, one moment of finally letting someone see what has been quietly hurting. There was a man named Richard. He was 79 years old, living in Phoenix with his wife of 42 years. Janet. From the outside, most people assumed Richard had a good life, 2 grown children, grandchildren nearby, a comfortable home, weekly family dinners, church on Sundays, a busy calendar, plenty of people around. And yet, Richard felt lonely, deeply lonely, not because he lacked people, but because somehow, he no longer felt understood. The loneliness had grown quietly over time. After retirement, life changed, his days slowed, the structure of work disappeared. Friends drifted, conversations changed, his children became busier, grandchildren grew older, everyone seemed to have their own world. Meanwhile, Richard quietly felt left behind. At family dinners, everyone talked, laughed, scrolled phones, shared updates, yet somehow, Richard often sat quietly, listening, smiling politely, rarely saying much. Not because he had nothing to say, but because somewhere along the way, he stopped feeling like anyone really wanted to hear it. One evening after dinner, while washing dishes, Janet looked at him carefully. "You've been quiet lately." Richard shrugged. "I am fine," but Janet knew that answer. 42 years together teaches people things. "You sure?" Richard paused, then softly said, "Sometimes I feel invisible." The sentence surprised even him. Invisible, that was exactly the word. Not unloved, not abandoned, just unseen. Weeks passed, the feeling stayed. One afternoon, while driving home alone, Richard found himself unexpectedly crying. Not dramatic tears, just quiet sadness, the kind that quietly builds over years. He realized something painful. He had spent so long trying not to burden anyone, that no one really knew how lonely he had become. A few weeks later, at Janet's encouragement, Richard reluctantly joined a men's mindfulness discussion group at a local community center. At first, he almost quit, too awkward, too personal, too uncomfortable. But during one meeting, another man quietly said, "Sometimes I feel lonely even sitting in my own house." The room went silent. Then another man nodded. "Me too," then another, "Same here." Richard sat very still because for the first time in years, he felt something unexpected. Relief, not because loneliness disappeared, but because suddenly, he no longer felt strange for feeling it. One evening, the facilitator gently said something Richard never forgot. "Sometimes loneliness grows when we stop allowing people to truly know us." The room grew quiet. Then came another sentence. "Strength is not pretending you are fine. Strength is allowing yourself to be seen." Seen. The word stayed with him. Because suddenly, Richard understood something painful. He had hidden his loneliness so carefully that even the people who loved him could no longer see it. Slowly, things began changing, not dramatically, not perfectly, just honestly. One evening after dinner, Richard sat beside Janet and quietly said, "Can I tell you something?" Janet smiled softly. "Always." Richard hesitated, then whispered, I think I've been lonely for a long time. Janet's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Richard, she reached for his hand. Why didn't you tell me? He looked down. I didn't want to burden you. Janet squeezed his hand gently. You're not a burden. That conversation changed something. Slowly, Richard started opening up more, calling old friends, talking more honestly with family, joining weekly meetups. Even simply telling the truth more often. I miss people, I've been struggling, I could use company. And strangely, the loneliness softened, not overnight but gently, months later at a family barbecue. His daughter smiled and said, "Dad, you seem happier lately." Richard laughed softly. I think I finally stopped pretending I was okay. And somehow, that honesty brought connection back. Dear friends, perhaps there is a Richard somewhere inside many of us. Someone surrounded by people, yet quietly feeling alone. Someone smiling politely, while carrying invisible sadness. Please hear this gently. You do not have to carry loneliness in silence. You do not have to pretend everything is fine. Needing connection is not weakness. Wanting to feel understood is not weakness. Wanting someone to truly see your heart is deeply human, and perhaps healing begins with something simple, not fixing everything, not dramatic change. Just honesty, the courage to whisper, I have been lonely, I miss connection, I don't want to carry this alone anymore. Because, dear friends, sometimes people cannot meet pain they never see, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do is finally let yourself be seen. Dear friends, as we gently come to the end of today's reflection, perhaps the most important truth to carry into your heart is this: loneliness is not proof that something is wrong with you. It is often proof that the heart still longs for connection, still longs to love, still longs to be understood, still longs to feel close. And dear friends, that longing is deeply human, especially after 70. Because after 70, life changes in quiet ways. The house grows quieter, the routines shift, people move away. Loved ones pass, retirement changes daily rhythms, friendships change, children build lives of their own. And somehow, the heart quietly begins adjusting to a world that feels different than before, not worse. Just different, and sometimes deeply lonely. Today, we gently reflected on why loneliness grows for so many people later in life. Not because older adults are weak, not because anyone has failed, but because change naturally brings grief. Loss naturally brings quiet, and the heart naturally misses connection. We reflected on something important. Loneliness is not always about being physically alone. Sometimes, it is emotional loneliness, feeling unseen, feeling unheard, feeling disconnected, feeling like no one truly understands the season of life you are walking through. And dear friends, please hear this gently. Your loneliness deserves compassion, not shame, not judgment, not silence, because pain hidden too long often becomes heavier, and loneliness carried quietly can slowly tire even the strongest heart. Perhaps one of the hardest things about growing older is this: many people stop asking deeper questions. How are you really? What has been hard lately? What is sitting quietly on your heart? And slowly, people begin answering life with polite smiles. I am fine. I am okay. Just keeping busy, even when something deeper hurts. But dear friends, you were never meant to carry life entirely alone. The Buddha gently taught again and again that healing often happens in connection. Connection with others. Connection with compassion. Connection with stillness. Connection with yourself. And perhaps one of the greatest forms of courage after 70 is this: allowing yourself to be seen, not perfectly, not dramatically, Just honestly saying, I miss connection. This season feels harder than I expected. I have been lonely, because sometimes healing begins the moment honesty enters the room. We also reflected on something beautiful. There is a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness wounds, but solitude can heal. Loneliness whispers. You are forgotten, but healing softly whispers. You are still here, you still matter. Life is still unfolding. Dear friends, perhaps this quieter season of life is not punishment. Perhaps it is invitation, an invitation to reconnect. Reconnect with meaning, reconnect with kindness, reconnect with community, reconnect with yourself. Perhaps this season gently asks, can you open your heart again? Can you let people in a little more? Can you stop pretending you are fine when your heart quietly hurts? Can you allow yourself companionship? Can you let yourself be cared for too? Please hear this gently. It is never too late for connection. Never too late for friendship. Never too late for healing. Never too late for joy, even after loss. Even after heartbreak, even after years of loneliness, peace still belongs to you. Connection still belongs to you. Love still belongs to you. And perhaps tonight, before sleep, you might place a hand gently over your heart. Take one slow breath and quietly ask yourself, what kind of connection does my heart still long for? Who could I reach toward a little more gently? What would happen if I stopped carrying loneliness alone? Because, dear friends, sometimes healing does not begin with solving loneliness. Sometimes healing begins with one brave step. One honest conversation, one phone call, one shared meal, one open heart, and slowly, quietly, the tired heart remembers. I am not as alone as I thought. If today's reflection brought even a small sense of comfort, please subscribe to Buddha's Healing and continue walking this journey of mindfulness, healing, and inner peace with us. And if loneliness has quietly touched your life, feel free to gently share it in the comments. Sometimes healing begins the moment we realize someone else understands. May your heart grow softer, may your days feel warmer, and may peace gently find its way back to you. One quiet breath at a time.